Well, hello and welcome to this English lesson where I'm going to talk about words and phrases related to air. And in the chat earlier, Island Resort was asking, what is air? Well, air is everything that's around you that you can't see. It's what we breathe, it's what we need to live. So, welcome. I just want to start again and say, welcome to this English lesson about air. I'm sure you will enjoy it. I did a previous lesson on fire and I did a previous lesson on water. You can probably guess what next week's lesson is going to be, but today's lesson will be about air. It will be about that invisible, awesome stuff that is around us that you only really see when the wind blows. You can see the effect that air has on stuff, but you can't actually see air. So welcome to this English lesson about air. So again, air is not something you can see, but it's incredibly important. We need air to live. We need air to function every single day. It is a vitally important thing in our life. You can see the effects of air, but you can't see air. I'm looking out the window as I talk. I'm facing a window. So I can see the leaves on the tree moving because the air is moving, but I can't actually see the air. But it's definitely all around us. We would say that it is invisible. Hey, Stool, thanks for the super sticker. Very, very kind of you. Thank you very much for that. So air makes up our atmosphere. The atmosphere is the layer of gases around the Earth, and primarily, it's basically air. The atmosphere is just a very thin layer, though, in the grand scheme of things. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that phrase, but when you say in the grand scheme of things, you mean when you're looking at everything all together. The size of the Earth compared to the atmosphere. The Earth is gigantic, and the atmosphere is relatively thin. I mean, it's many, many kilometers thick, but it is the layer of air that is around our planet. It's why we are alive. So air is made up of many things, but primarily it is made up of nitrogen and oxygen, okay? Two elements. It is made up of nitrogen and oxygen. It also has some other gases in it in smaller amounts. It has argon and carbon dioxide and a few other trace gases. When you say something's a trace gas, it's very, very small. But primarily it's about 78% nitrogen. That's rounded, by the way, and 21% oxygen. I think it's actually like 78.08 or 0.9% and then 20.95% or something. But I rounded the percentages to make it a little easier to understand. But air is made up of many things, but the vast majority of the air is made up, air is primarily made up of nitrogen and oxygen and various small gases. When we talk about air, we have a couple of ways to refer to it. When we go outside, we often say we're going out to get some fresh air, or it's nice to go camping because then there's lots of fresh air. The air in our apartments and in our houses is sometimes not fresh air. We might call it stale air, or we might say it's stuffy. But often when our kids were younger, when they were super excited and running around the house, we would say, go outside and get some fresh air. So fresh air is a term we use to talk about clean air that's outside. Generally, if you live in a city, the air might not be super clean. You might need to drive out to the countryside to get some fresh air. But fresh air is certainly air that is clean. And even in the spring here, the air smells really nice outside. One of the problems that we have on the planet is that we have air pollution. And we talked about this in a previous lesson. I did a lesson where I talked about pollution. Air pollution is when factories and even cars put things into the air that don't really belong there. In Canada, we have a lot of air pollution, but because there aren't very many people in Canada, it's not as bad as other parts of the world. So in Canada, in our larger cities, when you go close to the large highways where there's lots of cars, or when you go to the areas where there are lots of factories, you'll see a lot of air pollution. And our government and other governments around the world usually have people who measure the air quality. Air quality is a measure or a system where they can decide how good the air is on a particular day. In Ontario, Canada, in the summer, it's very, very humid in the summer. When it's humid, there's a lot of moisture in the air. And because we have a lot of cars and a lot of factories, sometimes in the summer, when it's humid, the air quality is not very good, okay? The air has a lot of moisture in it, but it also has a lot of pollution in it. So we have bad air quality. And they'll say that on the news. They'll say air quality today is really good around Toronto, or they'll say, if you're heading to Toronto today, the air quality is not very good. So there are two things I need to talk about. That's the word breath and the verb to breathe, okay? We all need to breathe. When you breathe, you inhale and then you exhale. So hopefully you heard that. When you inhale, you bring air into your lungs. And when you exhale, you push air back out again. This is a natural process for all animals and humans because we need to extract oxygen from the air. So to breathe, that is the verb we use to talk about when we inhale air and exhale air, okay? It's always good to breathe calmly and slowly when you need to relax. But breath is the actual noun, okay? So when I exhale, my breath comes out of my mouth, okay? So breathing, to breathe is the verb to talk about taking air in and out. But when you, like when I talk, my breath is coming out of my mouth. So to breathe is the verb and breath is the noun to refer to the air that you are breathing. Here's a better way to maybe understand it. When you are underwater, you sometimes need to hold your breath, okay? So this person is underwater and he is holding his breath because you can't breathe underwater. If you've ever accidentally tried to inhale while underwater, you get water in your lungs and then you start to cough. It's not a nice feeling. I had it happen a couple times as a kid. But when you go underwater, you need to hold your breath so you do not breathe. And I mentioned this earlier, when you breathe, you inhale because you need air to go into your lungs, and you exhale and the air comes back out of your lungs. So in our bodies, we have an organ called the lungs. There are two sides, and when you breathe, the lungs inflate to bring air in, and then they deflate when they push air out. Personal story about lungs, when I had heart surgery, they actually went in through the right side of my body and across. So I have an incision here, and they deflated my right lung during the surgery. Obviously, I was unconscious. I don't remember this, but for a couple days afterwards, my right lung hurt a little bit. So your lungs are what you use to breathe. It's what you use to inhale air and then exhale air. And we refer to air as being breathable. So to extend on the verb to breathe and the noun breath, we do have what's called breathable air. If you go scuba diving, you will fill your tanks with breathable air, air that is good to breathe, air that is about 78% nitrogen and 20% oxygen. Hopefully I got those numbers right. So as I just kind of mentioned, sometimes after you do exercise, you are out of breath. You've maybe done some running, maybe just walking fast, maybe you've just played a sport and you're breathing really, really quickly and you feel out of breath. So the feeling of being out of breath is usually something that happens after you do something athletic or after you play a sport. And then you might just need to catch your breath. So to catch one's breath means to pause and to stop doing something like running or playing a sport in order to be able to breathe normally again. So if you have ever played hockey, in hockey, there are shifts. So when I was younger, I played a little bit of hockey. At the end of my shift on the ice, I would be out of breath And I always looked forward to sitting on the bench for a few minutes to catch my breath. Okay. So when you are out of breath, you're like, you're breathing very quickly. It's like you can't get enough air in your body. And then when you stop for a bit, eventually you catch your breath. Your breathing returns to normal. I used to also, when I was younger, run in 5K races. Not a lot. I did it more for fun. I wasn't like a professional runner or anything. And sometimes during the 5K race, I would walk for about 30 seconds or a minute just to catch my breath. I wasn't in great shape. So one thing that people have been not having to worry about too much for the past year is something called bad breath. When you eat food and you don't brush your teeth, and you do that for a while, your breath starts to smell bad. And we would say you have bad breath. Because we are all 2 meters apart, because we've been spending over a year staying away from people, I have not smelled bad breath from anyone for 12 or 13 months or more. So bad breath is definitely something that's not very nice. By the way, when I was a student, I had a teacher that always had bad breath. That's not a very nice thing at all. When the teacher comes to answer your question and they have bad breath, it's an uncomfortable situation for sure. Let's see here. I see Maria saying, Brent from American English with this guy was out of breath after teaching while running over stairs 20 times. Yes, Brent has a video, by the way, where he teaches English while running up and down the stairs. You will probably see him eventually be out of breath, and then I think he'll probably catch his breath at the end. We have a phrase, you can describe someone or something as a breath of fresh air. So let's say at work, let's say you're boring. I know you're not boring, and your colleagues are boring, but they hire a new person who's very funny and hardworking, and you might say that that person is a breath of fresh air. So a breath of fresh air is any change, like a new person starting somewhere, or even let's say you had a car that always broke. Whenever you drove it, it broke, and then you bought a new one. That would be like a breath of fresh air for you. So we describe people or things as a breath of fresh air when they are a positive change in your life. So we have the wind. We talked about the wind briefly. Wind is simply air that is moving. Brent says, I smell my own bad breath behind my mask sometimes. That is the annoying thing about wearing a mask, isn't it? You kind of have all of your breath just gets stuck right around your face. It's kind of a weird feeling. Wind. So wind is air that is moving. You can't see the wind, but like I said earlier in the lesson, you can see the effect that wind has on other things. You can see the grass moving in the wind. If you ever have flown a kite, this person is flying a kite, the wind lifts the kite up into the air. If you look at trees on a windy day, you can see the trees swaying in the wind. So you can't see wind, but you can see what it does to the things around it. And then if the wind is not very strong, we call it a breeze. So like right now, when I look outside, I can see the branches on the trees. They're just moving slightly. So there's probably a light breeze outside this morning, not a strong wind or anything like that. There are two things that humans have built to capture the wind, to use the wind to run machinery or generate electricity. One is something that's called a windmill, and the other is something that's called a wind turbine. A windmill is generally an older structure like this, and windmills were used to, I think they used it to process wheat, to turn wheat into flour. Some of them maybe now are used to make electricity, but a wind turbine is definitely something newer and bigger that is used to generate electricity. So they harness the power of the wind. When you harness something, it means you hook up to it. So they used to harness a horse to a cart, but now we harness the power of the wind. So by the way, this is a windmill, this is a wind turbine. but people do sometimes call these windmills. Technically not correct, but it does still happen sometimes. People will call this a windmill, but I guess scientifically or technically it is a wind turbine. You can see the effect the wind has on things like sailboats. A sailboat is a boat that is powered by the wind. So the wind blows and the sail is able to capture or harness the power of the wind. As the wind moves over the sail will form into a curve, and that will allow the wind to help the boat move along. Hot air rises. So one of the interesting things about our planet is that air, as it gets warmer, will actually rise. So in our houses in the winter, when we heat our houses, the hot air eventually moves towards the ceiling. So sometimes in rooms in our house in the winter, my head will be warm, but my feet will be cold. Because hot air, as air gets hotter, I think it's less dense. And because the air is less dense, it will float above the cooler air. But yes, hot air rises, and then this is also what causes some kinds of weather. Okay, because air rises and then it cools, it creates thermal flows, I guess you would call them. Remember, this is not a science lesson. This is an English lesson. Because hot air rises, we can have things like hot air balloons. A hot air balloon has a large balloon, which is filled with warm or hot air. And because that air is lighter, that balloon is able to float in the sky or fly, depending on how you want to describe it. I bet you technically it's floating in the sky, but we would say that it's flying. And if you wanted to go on a hot air balloon, we call it a hot air balloon ride. Okay. I have never been on a hot air balloon. So I see in the chat someone saying, would you save this video, please, sir? This video actually comes out in a couple days in a shorter version, which you can listen to or watch again. So maybe that's what you're looking for, BQO Rhythm. That'll be out in a few days, 2 days actually. We have a phrase in English, though, to be full of hot air. If someone is full of hot air, it means they talk a lot, but they don't actually have a lot of factual information. So I've in the past have worked with people once in a while who just talk all the time, but it's like they don't actually know what they're talking about. So they're just full of hot air. It's kind of a funny phrase. I don't think I've ever been accused of being full of hot air. Air can be compressed. So you can have a certain amount of air and you can use something to compress that amount of air. The best example I can give for air pressure is that in our tires, we have a certain amount of air. That air has been put in and it gets compressed a bit. And usually when you are driving a bike or a car, you want all of the tires to have the same amount of air pressure in them. I don't know the exact amount, but probably between 30 and 60 PSI, which is pounds per square inch. And if you use the metric system, you probably use something different, and I can't remember what it is. But I do know this. Sometimes you use a pressure gauge to measure the amount of air pressure that you have in your tires. And it's important that it is the correct amount. If you look at the side of a tire, it will usually tell you how much air pressure you should have. You probably are familiar with air pressure when you go down a mountain or up a mountain because your ears start to hurt and you need to make your ears pop, or you need to. So this is what I do. When I go to a town close to me, I go down, not a mountain, but I go down a fairly large hill. We call it a mountain, but it's not a mountain. And then when I get to the bottom, my ears feel funny. And I go like this, or I kind of like go like this. Like you kind of try to make your ears pop because your ears, there's air pressure inside or there is air pressure outside, and you need to equalize the air pressure. So you need to make your ears pop. I think most of you have probably experienced that at one time or another. In order to compress air, you would use an air compressor. So this is a machine that you use to take air from the atmosphere or to just take air from outside, and it goes through an air pump, and the pump will put air into the tank at a higher pressure than the outside air. So I have an air compressor in my shed. I use my air compressor to pump up my tires. So if a tire on my car or on a bike is low or close to being flat, I will use my air compressor to pump up the tire. I will use my air compressor to put compressed air into the tire. Sometimes when you need to clean your computer, you might buy a can of compressed air. So this is a small can filled with air that you can use to blow dust out of your computer. When you drive a car, you can't see it, but there is air resistance and there is a lot of drag. These terms mean the same thing. They design cars to be as aerodynamic as possible. When something is aerodynamic, it can move through the air with a little bit more ease. Okay, it's a little easier for an aerodynamic vehicle. So a big truck that is square, there is a lot of air resistance. There is a lot of drag. The truck has to burn a lot of fuel to go fast. But a new car is very aerodynamic. There is less air resistance and less drag, and so it can drive a little easier through the air. So we had the question about air conditioning versus a fan. A fan is something that you can plug into the wall that will blow air on you and help keep you cool. On Sunday nights, I do a live stream called GeoGuessr. I play a game called GeoGuessr, and the sun is actually shining into the room I do it in. I get really hot. So this week, I'm not sure I'm going to play this week, by the way, GeoGuessr, but if I do play on Sunday night, I'll need a fan, I think, to stay cool. We won't turn the air conditioning on yet, though. A couple weeks ago, we did a lesson on air travel. Air travel is when you buy a ticket and go on a plane and you travel by air. So someone might say, oh, you're going to visit your brother in Florida. Are you going to drive or are you going to take a plane? And you could respond and say, oh, we're going to go by air. So there's a couple of ways to talk about air travel, but air travel is when you get in a plane and fly somewhere. Kids sometimes make paper airplanes. I just added this one for fun because while I was searching for pictures for air travel, this came up. A common fun thing to do for children is to make paper airplanes, although some adults actually make paper airplanes as well and really enjoy entering paper airplane competitions. I've been in one or two. At school, sometimes for fun. Every few years, we'll have a paper airplane competition. I've never won, but I think I came in third once. It was a really cool airplane. In your car, you will most likely have airbags. An airbag is something that's inside the steering wheel, or on the far side, it's inside the dash of the car. And when the car gets into an accident, the airbag is deployed. Okay, so the airbag fills with air so that you hit your head against the airbag instead of the steering wheel or the dash. Airbags were available in cars in North America for a number of years now, a couple decades. When I was a kid, our cars did not have airbags. My first car did not have an airbag when I was 17 or 18. My second car had an airbag. So they're relatively recent in the world in the last few decades. Sometimes people play air guitar. So when you're listening to a song, a rock and roll song, and when there is a part where you can hear the guitar, people sometimes pretend they're playing the guitar even though they don't have a guitar. And we call this air guitar. So sometimes people will be like, I love this part. And then they'll pretend to play guitar. And we say that they are then playing air guitar. This is not a word you should use. It is an insult. But when someone isn't very smart, sometimes people will call them an airhead. They'll say, he's such an airhead or she's such an airhead. So again, this is an insult. Please do not use this word to refer to anyone, but you might see this in an English story, or you might hear this on an English television show. They might call someone an airhead. So an airhead is someone who just isn't very smart. So again, it's an insult. You can call yourself an airhead. Like sometimes I'm an airhead. Here's a good one. I lost my keys about a couple months ago. I couldn't find my keys, and then they were just laying by my computer. So I said to myself, oh, I'm such an airhead. They're right here. So you can call yourself an airhead. That's for sure. Let's see here. Mode Egg says, I didn't know there was a word describing that. I thought it was just people getting carried away with music and start jamming and dancing. Now they're definitely playing air guitar. In fact, they even sometimes have competitions which are called air band competitions, where everyone pretends they're playing an instrument. It's kind of funny and weird. Funny, more funny than weird. We talked about this earlier. There's a phrase up in the air. When something is up in the air, it is undecided. Okay, so here's a good example. On Sunday nights, I have been playing GeoGuessr in a live stream on my other YouTube channel on Bob's Short English Lessons. But I'm not sure I'm going to do it this week. It's kind of up in the air. Sunday is Mother's Day here in Canada. So I think it might be better just to hang out with Jen on Sunday and the kids and do something fun. Maybe we'll have a little campfire outside. But if it's raining and we're all just stuck in the house, I might do it. So it's up in the air. So when something's up in the air, it is not decided. Okay, so it could be one way or the other. So by the way, it is up in the air. I might have a live stream Sunday. I might not. Most likely not. Airflow. Sometimes you're sitting in a room in your house or apartment and it's getting stuffy. I mentioned this earlier. And you want some fresh air. You want some airflow. So you might open up the windows. When you open the windows, especially for me, if I open 2 windows, sometimes I get some nice airflow in my house. Airflow is simply when air moves through your house through a window. It's anytime air is moving, actually. So airflow. Sometimes it's nice in the summer. I'd rather have the windows open and have some nice airflow instead of turning on the air conditioning. Because sometimes the air is stale. You have stale air. If you are stuck in an apartment in the summer, and sometimes you go to a hotel and you can't open the windows, and sometimes the air is very stale. It smells kind of funny. It's not fresh. It's the opposite of fresh air. We talked about this earlier as well. When you go really high up, the air is thinner. So at the top of a mountain, you have thin air. So the lower you go on Earth, the more dense the air is. And the higher you go, the less dense the air is. When you go to the top of a mountain, the air is very thin. And if you go really high, it can be hard to breathe. We have a term, open air. So I mentioned we might have a campfire on Sunday night to celebrate Mother's Day, and we will have an open air fire. So a fire in a fireplace or in a wood stove is not an open air fire. An open air fire is a fire that's outside, like this fire. The reason I mention this term is because where I live, sometimes it gets very dry, and the fire department will say there is a ban on open air fires right now. You can't have an open air fire. So an open air fire is any fire that you would have outside. To air, we have a verb to air, which means to complain about all the things you want to complain about. Okay, so sometimes when you go to a large meeting, there will be a time at the end for questions, and people will get up and air their grievances. They'll air all of their complaints. So it simply means to talk about the things that are bothering you. And it's usually in somewhat of a formal setting, I think. We talked about air conditioners. An air conditioner is something that takes warm air and makes the air colder. Sometimes you have an air conditioner like this that goes in a window. Sometimes you have an air conditioner that is just outside your house somewhere, and there's pipes that come in your house that bring, well, they don't bring the cold air, but they bring the Freon or other coolant to cool the air down in your house. Air conditioners actually do 2 things. They cool the air down, and they also remove moisture from the air. So you don't just get cold air, you also get air that has less moisture in it, is less humid. And sometimes people will buy what's called an air purifier. An air purifier is an appliance that takes things out of the air, okay? When you run an air purifier, it removes dust from the air. It might remove, I was going to say dander, and I don't remember what dander is. Let's look up what dander is. Meaning of dander. I heard it in a commercial. It removes dust and dander. Oh, so dander is like skin flakes from animals or humans or small pieces of fur or hair. So yes, dust and dander. So an air purifier will remove that from the air. It does that because inside it will have an air filter. So in a car will have 1 or 2 air filters. Sometimes a furnace, which is something you use to heat your house, will have air filters in it. An air purifier will have air filters. They look like this. They're usually made of some sort of fabric or material. My tractors have several air filters on them because in order for the engines to run, the air needs to be clean. So it needs to go through an air filter first. And I'm just wondering, I'm just going to ask in the chat, it's Mother's Day in many places this weekend, correct? I think it is. We are planning, I think, to visit my mom. I think we're having a Zoom meeting with my mom. I have to ask my sisters, but yes, it's definitely Mother's Day this weekend. So you probably won't see me Sunday. I'll probably be offline. There is, of course, a shoe called a Nike Air. Most people in the world are familiar with this shoe. The Nike Air has been around for many, many years. You could maybe even remember when you had Air Jordans. Maybe you had a pair of Air Jordans when you were younger. It is definitely a popular shoe, the Nike Air, and many, many people love to have them. I had a pair of Nike Airs once, I think, in my life, but they were kind of expensive, so I don't really buy them anymore. I buy the traditional cheap old man shoes. There's a band called Air Supply. If you are not familiar with this band, I highly recommend you listen to 1 or 2 songs to help you learn some English. They are usually songs about love. It's an older band from the 80s, late 70s, early 80s maybe. I have to check. But Air Supply has a number of songs. You should check some out. It's not my favorite band, but when an Air Supply song comes on, sometimes I do sing along because I do know them. They're a very popular band if you listen to classic rock on the radio or even easy listening. When there is no air, you have a vacuum. So if you go into space, once you go high enough in the atmosphere, eventually the air gets thinner and thinner, and you get to the point where there is no air. And that is what we would call a vacuum. So a vacuum cleaner is something you use to clean your rugs in your house, to suck up everything off the floor. But a vacuum is something that exists in space, or anytime you remove all of the air from something, okay? You will then have a vacuum. And then just for fun, here's another word, air, which sounds a lot like heir, but isn't. So when you are an heir, it means you are the descendant who will, I'm trying to think of how to explain this. Like Prince William is an heir to the throne, okay? So heirs are your descendants. So usually not your own children though, but you can use it that way. If I was to use the word heir, I would say, maybe I'll leave some money someday to my heirs, okay? But it's usually used for formal descriptions of people who are in a royal family like the one in Britain. So definitely Prince Charles is heir to the throne, and I think Prince William is second in line to the throne. So they are both heirs to the throne. So I thought I would throw that one in there because heir is pronounced the same way as heir.